Professor Fawaz Gerges. I've read his books, I've known about him, I've seen him on TV, but this is the first time I'm welcoming him in person. So it really is a wonderful occasion for us, and thank you very much to all of you for coming despite the very nice weather that we rolled out for him. Professor Gerges is a professor of Middle Eastern politics and international relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science at LSE. He also holds the Emirate Chair of the Contemporary Middle East and is the director of the Middle East Center at LSE. In addition to this book, Obama and the Middle East, he has authored a number of books and has contributed in pieces to the New York Times, the Washington Post, Newsweek, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, and he has taught at Oxford, Harvard, Columbia, and was a research scholar at Princeton and the chairholder of Christian A. Johnson Chair in Middle Eastern Studies. He's an expert on contemporary Middle East, and which include Islam and political process, social movements, and mainstream Islamist movement. This is a fascinating book, and I read it almost in one go, coming from the Middle East in 7.5 hours, which made the trip very easy, very quick, and sort of started scribbling on the margins. So I will have a number of questions when we open after your presentation, when we open the session to Q&A. Fawaz is going to give us a synopsis of the book. He'll talk for maybe 25 minutes or 30 minutes about the book, and then we'll open the floor to your questions, comments, and some of you may have heard him today at 11 o'clock on the Diane Rehm show, and I must say that we are the number 2 event in this stand. Number 1 was Diane Rehm. We are number 2. It's going to be at Politics and Prose, and I believe the Middle East Institute also. Or I don't know, I got another invitation from somewhere. So with that in mind, you have the
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind remarks. I mean it, and it's an honor to be here. And I want to second also my colleague and say thank you for taking the time and attending this talk today. Unfortunately, we have just 1 hour, as you know, and I really have so much to say. I'm an academic. I have to earn my salary. So it really is very difficult for me to summarize the big points and also the details, the empirical record. But let me, before I talk about the Obama administration and the Middle East, let me say a few words about the context. The context matters a great deal. First of all, I know it's a cliche. This is not a polemical book, and I have to say it because it's really neither for nor against. I'm a historian. Of course, I have my own biases and predilections and what have you, but really I have gone out of my way to do justice to the Obama presidency and the Middle East. And I hope you take me to task if I have not gone to great lengths to do justice to the presidency and the Middle East in the last 4 years. The second point, this is not just about the Obama presidency and the Middle East. You can't write a book about the administration and the Middle East. This is about American foreign policy and the Middle East. That is, again, I go to great lengths to contextualize the Obama presidency and the Middle East. And this is, I don't need to tell you, I mean, one of my biggest chapters in the book. It's called America's Encounter with the Middle East, the Bitter Legacy, the Bitter Inheritance. And this, Barack Obama inherited truly a bitter legacy in the Middle East, whose roots go back to the Cold War, the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, culminating, of course, in the 9/11 wars, particularly the Iraq War itself. I think also, just a few words about the context, I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that when President W. Bush left office, I think the United States reached its lowest point in relations with that part of the world, the Greater Middle East. That was really the lowest point in the history of relations between the United States and the Greater Middle East. And when I say the Greater Middle East, I'm talking about the Muslim world as a whole. This is very important. I don't have the time to talk about this bitter legacy that go back to 1947 and basically culminates in America's led invasion and occupation. But this particular legacy has become deeply entrenched, I would argue, on both sides. Again, when Barack Obama came to office, and here multiple wars on multiple fronts, hundreds of thousands of American troops battling in Muslim lands. The US was engaged in a social engineering project that really had little to do with its national security needs and interests. America's moral standing, not just in the Middle East, in the entire world, I mean, suffered a major setback, in particular torture at home and torture abroad. Even allies, I would argue, and foes, and I spend a lot of time on the historical chapters, the first two chapters, basically question the whole idea that the United States would act as a rational player in order to guarantee international stability. Not just, our enemies, even our allies, states, major geostrategic, economic, and political powers like Turkey, began to question the whole idea that the United States really could be trusted to maintain a very fragile balance of power. A revolt, truly, by 2008, 2009, a revolt was brewing, in particular, not just in the Middle East, against the unilateral use of force by the United States. Because after all, the United States was the most powerful nation, and here the United States was using and abusing the very institutions in a very unilateral way. And the call became very vocal about the need to construct a new international system, a system that basically not only the unilateral nature of the balance of power, but multiple sources and bases of power. The real costs, I know I'm simplifying a great deal, the real costs of the 9/11 wars, we can talk about the real cost, 3 billion, trillion, or 5 trillions. I call the Al-Qaeda the $5 trillion project. According to Brown University, and these are not my numbers, the United States has spent at least $4.5 trillion on the 9/11 wars. Well, we can afford it, obviously, but you're talking about, huge investments in the war, in the global war against terror. And also we need to take into account the opportunity costs, not just the money that we invested, but while we were chasing, roving bands of Al-Qaeda and militants in the valleys and wadis of Afghanistan and Pakistan, other places, the world was marching on. And geostrategic, economic, and global powers were really putting their economic houses in order and creating the foundation of a new international system. Again, the decline of the U.S. economy, of course, was not related directly to, the 9/11 wars, but the United States was in a horrible position when Barack Obama, just to give you an idea, at least how I contextualized the book when Barack Obama came to office. Not only that, also you're talking about the fact that the very credibility, not only the credibility, the moral standing, the deterrence power of the United States. Here, the United States went to Iraq in 2003. Supposedly, we were going to plant Jeffersonian seeds in the heart of the Arabian desert, and then the domino theory effects will. Yet, the very deterrent power of the United States suffered a major setback. And people really began to contemplate the fact that the United States was not, after all, that powerful nation. That here you have, I mean, the so-called al-Muqawama, resistance in Iraq, could really somehow hold the United States at bay. People really began to question the idea that the United States can be defeated, could be defeated. And even the allies of the United States could be defeated. The idea was really basically began to resonate in that part of the world that was not as really, it was not an impossible mission. And I think when the Obama foreign policy team came, I think I would argue, based on everything that we know, they were fully aware of this particular bitter inheritance. They were fully aware of the vivid sense of America's relative decline, as opposed to decline vis-a-vis the rising geostrategic and geoeconomic powers in the international system. And they also realized that the United States had overextended itself far beyond what its strategic interests were in that part of the world, the Middle East. This was, I mean, I think a consensus emerged within the Obama foreign policy team that the United States was too overextended. Was basically, America's future does not lie in the shifting sands of the Middle East. America's future lies in the Pacific region and Asia, and the United States must basically reassess its priorities. And I think in this particular sense, they wanted to really make a clean break with the whole idea, the liberal use of force unilaterally. I think Barack Obama was extremely, as you well know, I'll come back to the conceptual points about his administration, that the idea itself was not only counterproductive, very misguided as well, because the whole idea of top-down armies by Western powers going to Muslim lands trying to plant Jeffersonian seeds, it defies logic and rationality. Anyone who knows a bit about the history of relations between the Western powers and the greater Middle East would have said, wait a minute before you send your boots on the ground, because automatically in the minds and of the people in that part of the world come the idea of colonialism and the whole bitter inheritance deeply entrenched in that part of the world. I think if there is, and this I'm going to come just 5 minutes about the conceptual, if there is one fundamental point that I stress in the book throughout, is that the Obama approach is deeply entrenched, deeply anchored in the dominant consensus about foreign policy in the United States. And one of the points I really highlight is that both the left and the right really misunderstood Barack Obama foreign policy. That's the reality. Barack Obama, I mean, starting in 2006, he made it very clear that he was not a transformational president when it comes to foreign policy. He was a realist. Time and again, he stressed that he was a realist in the spirit of Bush Sr. and JFK. He was not. He not only does not believe in the promotion of democracy, he believes that foreign policy is basically belongs to the whole idea of the realist thinking, collective security, mutual interests. His code word throughout from 2006, I don't preach to other nations. He was not really in the league of President Wilson. He does not believe in the whole idea of but rather he believed that realism is the underlying principle, should be the underlying principle of America's foreign policy in that part of the world. And he also made it very clear that his goal really was to return America's foreign policy to what it used to be before the new conservatives hijacked American foreign policy. That was Barack Obama, and that's why I say that Barack Obama deeply anchored in the consensus, in the paradigm, in the realist paradigm in American foreign policy, not just about the Middle East, but about international politics. And what this, I mean, again, we simply, once we understand this particular paradigm, collective security, mutual interests, the whole idea of promotion of democracy is not only misguided, but counterproductive to the idea, also to the vision of democracy promotion. Another important point I highlight through the book, I want to come back to the Middle East, just bear with me for a minute, is that the Middle East has never been a top priority for Barack Obama and his foreign policy team, never. On the contrary, as I suggested earlier, there was a consensus within the Obama foreign policy teams that the United States had overextended itself far and beyond what its vital interests are in the Middle East. And they realized that basically the powers, I mean, it is China, India, South Korea, Japan, Australia. This is really where the future is. And they wanted to shift American foreign policy priorities to the Pacific region and Asia, as opposed to really, remain deeply engaged in the Middle East. But they also realized that they could not just pack and leave. That was not, again, hundreds of thousands of American troops, tremendous resources and assets and engagement. They wanted to, basically, Barack Obama wanted to, he and his team, to begin the process of mending the historic rift to that part of the world. Begin the process, the whole idea of outreach. Many of us, really, the whole idea obscured what really the Obama foreign policy priorities were. Outreach was supposed to really begin the process of disengagement, as opposed to really remain deeply engaged in the Middle East. And what the idea of the mending the rifts with the Middle East really required, reducing the military, the US military boots in that part of the world. That was a very critical point, in particular in Iraq and Afghanistan, helping to broker a Palestinian-Israeli peace settlement. Barack Obama was not the only president, but was one of the few presidents who basically linked a Palestine-Israel peace settlement to America's strategic interests. It was not just for the sake of peace, but it was also part of America's vital strategic interest. A systemic campaign on the part of Barack Obama to really try to change the narrative about America and that part of the world. You know, the whole using his own story, his own personal story as members in his family, and a series of big speeches starting in Ankara, Cairo, Jakarta, really trying to basically deal with this bitter inheritance, to change the focus into different dialogue, different type of debate. And also test the waters with Iran. That is, again, while keeping the sanctions against Iran in place, also he appealed to the Iranian leadership publicly in order to give up their nuclear program. And of course, hammer away relentlessly against Al-Qaeda. This is an area, it was a strategic priority for Barack Obama. His most important directive from day one, the idea is an iron fist approach, dismantle Al-Qaeda and hammer, using all resources at his disposal in order to really destroy Al-Qaeda. Now we come back to the verdict. How much time do I have?
You have it. That's okay.
I've just really, I put on the table just some concepts to give you an idea of how Barack Obama, his conception of the world and the Middle East, and to see really where are we today. That is, how much, I would argue that the record is very mixed, and I'm not saying anything original. I think any fair, analytical assessment of Barack Obama, based on this bitter inheritance of relation between, will have to, it's mixed, and we have to look at, I don't believe you can say, pigeonhole Barack Obama, the Barack Obama presidency, and say success or failure. I think this is the wrong way to go. This is polemical, does not take us anywhere. We need to talk about questions, issues, subjects, and see, how he has done, and given the constraints on Barack Obama. I think, to my mind, one of Obama's most important political achievements has been the reduction of U.S. boots on the ground in Muslim lands, basically drawing down from Afghanistan and pulling out American forces from Iraq, truly. This is one of the most important, I think, political achievements. This is not theoretical. Some of us who know a bit about the Middle East, the presence of American boots on the ground in Middle Eastern societies and Muslim societies is insidious, poisonous, almost really brought ruins to America's relations with that part of the world, provided ammunition to militants and radicals who, again, we can talk about why the presence, it's commonsensical, but I would be delighted to explain further why this is an important achievement. And as you know, despite the US military's persistent efforts to maintain a sizable force in Iraq, I mean, they went out of their way. The new leadership in Iraq that was put in place by the United States would not sign away the sovereignty, in particular by allowing US forces, US troops to have legal immunity from prosecution in Iraq itself. So despite the military's best efforts, and Barack Obama, even though he promised, he pledged to the American people to bring American forces, he went along with the military. And I come back what really says about Barack Obama, yet Barack Obama had no choice, because the Iraqis were unwilling to play by the rules of the US military. He had to bring American forces, all American uniformed forces from Iraq. And this tells you a great deal. I think I'll come back to it. I mean, the book is subtitled The End of America's Moment, the beginning of the end of America's dominance. What does it tell us really about the whole idea of America's dominance or predominance, and what has happened? Why do we see signs of the waning American decline? And this goes back to the whole idea of 9/11 wars. The 9/11 wars really have the opposite results of their intended consequences, undermining not only America's credibility, but also America's deterrence power and the whole idea that the United States was the paramount power. Again, Afghanistan, you know that the surge in Afghanistan has not produced the desired effects. I don't need to tell you. You know better than I do that the Taliban is not going anywhere, that the Taliban remain a potent force and will likely play a key role in the future of Afghanistan, mostly for the worse, unfortunately, as opposed to, unfortunately, for Afghanistan, because I don't think the Taliban have any vision for their country. But the reality is, I think most American forces will be coming home soon, in a year or two, from Afghanistan, and the Afghans will be in charge of their own destiny, and Afghanistan will have to deal with its own security questions. And I think one of the major points I take from the whole idea of bringing American troops home is that, in contrast to his predecessor, I think Barack Obama and his foreign policy team do know the significance of pulling American troops from Muslim lands, and they realize, again, I'm not saying anything original, that as long as American troops remain in Muslim lands, this will remain a critical challenge for the United States in that part. It's a source of instability, a source of hostility. And there is a relative consensus in that part of the world that the presence of American troops is a great source, ideological source, for militancy and for extremism. And not to mention the fact that it's too costly. That the fact is, our presence, we're still paying about $100 billion a year in Afghanistan. I wonder whether, we can afford to pour more, 100 billions here and there, given the nature of the American economy. I think Obama's outreach to Muslims has been largely beneficial. I don't think it has done any harm whatsoever, even though it's really fraught with contradictions and inconsistencies. I think there's a widespread belief, based on everything we know, that Barack Obama does not really mean what he says in that part of the world. There was a great expectations when he came to office, in particular the first 9 months or so, that Barack Obama was different, that he represents a breath of fresh air within the American political system, that Barack Obama really would like to deliver on the peace process. I think these promises, people now realize that Barack Obama, and I'm talking about how people view the president in the Middle East. They don't see him as a transformational president. They don't invest his words with any meanings, because people are not, again, I don't need to tell you that they're not dumb. They realize, what he has done and what he has not done. And they realize it's basically he has not been able to do what he pledged to do. What's interesting, really what has happened in the Arab world in the last 15 months, the whole idea, the uprising and the revolts, that people really have moved on. The debate has shifted, truly. The debate in the Arab world and the larger has shifted from foreign policy to domestic politics, to governance, to the whole idea of effective citizenship, to the question of dignity and bread and butter. And I think in a way, Barack Obama has really helped to, indirectly, in really shifting this particular debate from what we call the cultural minefields of foreign policy to question of domestic politics and governance. People realize that, I mean, you don't hear, and to me, the reason why the whole idea, the end of America's moment is not a bad thing. The end of America's dominance could be a good thing for both that part of the world and the United States, because people now, the United States is no longer seen as basically the player behind everything else, that the United States has been historically blamed for all the ills and misfortunes that have befallen that part of the world. I mean, you don't hear the name of America in the same way used to before the 15 months. The question now is on domestic challenges, on bread and butter, on jobs, on empowerment. And I think, because I think Barack Obama, in many ways, he helped to shift the debate. Of course, it's very difficult materially to document how he did so, but because the way even he responded to the Arab uprisings over the last 15 months, of course, he belatedly after a few weeks, but he insisted on keeping a healthy distance. He insisted that people should take ownership of the revolts, and I think they should. This is essential. It's their own. They must take ownership of it. And I think in this particular sense, he did not really provide any kind. That's why if you go to Egypt or Tunisia or Morocco or Yemen, the United States is not seen to have either blocked or helped. People march on. And it's this really what we are witnessing in the region, and I would be delighted to answer any questions about the Arab uprisings, an area I know quite a bit about, is that there is an awakened public opinion. An awakened public opinion that believes that somehow it's really the master of its own destiny. And this, in many ways, I think, does help a great deal in the process of mending relations, because the blame is no longer on the United States itself. Even though the contradictions that while we embrace the uprisings in Libya and Syria and other places, we hardly say any word about Bahrain. Even though we rhetorically embrace the uprisings, we have no initiatives, no material plans, no global leadership to really help transitioning societies, hardly anything at all. I mean, if you listen to one of his most important speeches on May 11, 2011 at the State Department, it's a wonderful speech, a really historic speech, but yet no concrete initiatives. And no one is talking about American monies. We don't have the money. No one is really asking for it. There's tons of money there. We're talking about global leadership. And I would be delighted to talk about the challenges, because they're really overwhelming challenges. I mean, 43% of the 320 million Arabs live either in poverty or below the poverty line. Broken societies, institutional building, I mean, block by block. And the United States does not have to do it directly. The United States can really play an indirect role in helping a transitional society. We have not seen it. Barack Obama is engaged somewhere else, at home, in other places. The Middle East is not really tells us a great deal that the Middle East does not top Barack Obama's priority. And I saved, I think if reducing the U.S. troops from Muslim lands is Obama's greatest political achievement, Obama's greatest political failure is, again, the Palestine-Israel conflict. It truly is. And it tells us a great deal. It's only, and it's not about rhetoric here, we're not scoring. I think because for a simple, remember, this is a president that basically linked the resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict to America's strategic vital interest. The military as an institution basically linked a resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict to the immediate security concerns of the American military and the security apparatus. The first telephone call the president ever made when he came to on the first day, was to Mahmoud Abbas, promising a settlement on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. He invested a limited political capital in trying to confront Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, the three major confrontations, and I don't have the time to really. President Barack Obama caved in the 3 confrontations and 3 losses for Barack Obama. What does, I mean, again, I want to simplify. I think it's not just the lobby. I don't buy the whole idea that somehow we can reduce everything to lobby. It's nonsense. I think it's part of what I call the American political system as a whole, the dysfunctional American political system, which includes special interest groups, the Congress, a consensus that has been formed over the since the late 1960s, how the United States view that part of the world. And this particular consensus, Barack Obama, and I started by saying that Barack Obama really subscribes to the consensus. Barack Obama, I mean, basically, you can't assess Barack Obama in terms of foreign policy except within the dominant paradigm in American foreign policy. Yes, he is genuine. Yes, he means it when he says he wants to help the Palestinians and the Israelis broker a peace settlement. But Barack Obama, when he faced with major obstacles and challenges, when his political capital was online, Barack Obama was unwilling to really go the extra mile to create a constituency for peace, to challenge the dominant consensus. And what this tells us, I think, is also the structural institutional continuity in American foreign policy. And this structural institutional continuity, you cannot understand the persistent failure on this particular front. And I am one of these researchers who still believe that the Palestine-Israel conflict is the most fundamental fault line. It truly is. Despite all the nonsense, the ideological nonsense that we have heard since 9/11, it is the most fundamental fault lines in the region and in relations between the greater Middle East, the Muslim world, and the Western powers. And not just the institutional constraints. I mean, I think also I find it difficult to criticize Barack Obama. Barack Obama is timid, basically very timid. He governs by consensus. Every time he faces major obstacles, basically he often retreats. And it's not just on the Palestine-Israel conflict. I think his timidity speaks volumes about his personality as a decision maker. The reality is that's who he is. I want to leave it at that because I want to say a few words about Iran. Do I have 5 minutes? I mean, Iran, again, I don't need to tell you, is a gamble for Barack Obama. It could go either way. Could really, in a year, we might have a breakthrough if the leadership, the Iranian leadership, basically makes the concessions that the United States and the Western powers, or we could find ourselves at war with Iran in the next year. And I would argue, again, you know this as much as I do, if not more probably, and you do this much more than I. I think the odds were against the Obama initiative to the Iranian leadership. And I want to just put my ideas on the table for you so you can really see where I go with it. First of all, I mean, he wanted to engage the Iranian leadership, yet he maintained the sanctions. He never wavered from basically reducing or lessening the sanctions against Iran. I don't know if you know this. From day one, he sent his top advisors to European capitals, making very clear, reassuring Western allies, and the WikiLeaks documents show very clearly that the United States will maintain sanctions, will maintain the pressure, will maintain on the Iranian leadership, while, of course, appealing to Iranian leadership to to give up their nuclear weapons. Of course, he talked softly, but he never, given up the iron fist approach to Iran. Again, I don't need to tell you, he has faced stiff institutional and bureaucratic resistance in the United States, not just from the right, but even from within the Democratic Party. Stiff resistance. I'm talking about his top allies within the Democratic Party, coupled with special interest pressure, tremendous, overwhelming pressure. And Barack Obama, the intelligent politician, knows very well what it means. He never educated the American public about the benefits of rapprochement with the Islamic Republic and the costs of confrontation, because that would have required a great deal of capital. Again, the Middle East does not really top Barack Obama's foreign policy priorities. He had a full agenda. Israel and the Gulf states have exerted tremendous pressure from day one on Barack Obama in order not to really engage the Iranians and basically soften his approach towards Iran. I don't have the time to talk about, again, I'm sure most of you have seen the WikiLeaks documents and what the Saudis and the various and the Bahrainis and the United Arab Emirates, and we know Israel stand on this Israel has been very consistent. Not only you don't engage Iran, in fact, you want to use force if they don't really behave. It's not just, the institutional, bureaucratic, and special interests. The Iranian leadership, unfortunately, is neither far-sighted nor united. They never trusted Barack Obama. I don't think they have mastered the art of making enemies, of making fools of themselves, a fragmented decision-making process. They have never met Barack Obama halfway. They have never engaged Barack Obama. They have never realized the constraints under which Barack Obama was acting. And that's why I think we in the last few months, the drums of war have become louder and louder. And I think here, the verdict is that Barack Obama really has fought himself into a bind. That if the Iranian leadership does not retreat, Barack Obama has to go to war. That he has no exit strategy, because basically the reality is not only has Benjamin Netanyahu won the debate on the Palestine-Israel peace process, but won the debate even on Iran. And he played his cards well. In the first meeting between Barack Obama and Netanyahu, President Barack Obama would not discuss Iran. He said the first priority is the Palestine-Israel peace process. We'll take care of that. Once we do that, we undermine the Iranian leadership, because Iran uses and abuses the Palestine question. In the last meeting, Palestine, I don't know whether it was on the agenda. I doubt it very much. It was the question of reassuring the Prime Minister that the United States means business, that the President does not bluff, that our plans are in order. We have everything in place in order to go to war against Iran. Finally, the war on terror. And again, this is the record speaks for itself. It's an iron fist approach. He has been much more effective, and much deadlier than his predecessor, despite all the nonsense that the neoconservatives have spoken about the war. In 3 years, he has done more damage to Al-Qaeda and whatever than in 7 years, the Bush team. But that's a different story. Al-Qaeda, no longer exists. As a centralized organization, it does not. Of course, Osama bin Laden, old fool, was almost penniless when he was and isolated. We know this for many years. I've written extensively. I had a book last year on the anniversary of 9/11 called The Rise and Fall of Al-Qaeda. And I was one of the voices who have been arguing for many years that the worst thing to do is to declare conventional war against Al-Qaeda, a non-conventional, tiny entity. I think Barack Obama has used non-conventional means in terms of special operation forces, in terms of drone wars. Tremendous, though technically has done a great deal of damage. I worry a great deal myself. I really do, about the blowback effects. Don't be sure that the blowback effects might not come to haunt us. And I'm talking particularly here about Pakistan, what the damage of the whole idea of the counterterrorism measures. We tend to celebrate a great deal in the United States. We have a tendency for celebrations. But I want you to really reflect on the spillover effects, on the reverberations of America's counterterrorism effects, on the whole debates of using force with no legal restraint, the whole idea of the drawn-at-war special operation forces, in particular in Pakistan. I'm not talking about Yemen. Yemen is an important, I'm done in this. My take on it, and this is, it's one of the most beautiful thing we have learned about the Arab uprising is that really the Arab Spring dealt a fatal blow to Al-Qaeda's tactics and ideology. We knew all along this. We have barked for many years that there are few takers for Al-Qaeda's ideology, that is, you fight Al-Qaeda using different mechanics and means. But what we have seen in the last 15 months really have reinforced many of our ideas about the huge divide that exists between Al-Qaeda's tactics and ideology and the middle opinion in the Arab world. Different world, different take, different aspirations, different rallying cries. Al-Qaeda was in wilder, fairy tale. The Arab world and millions of people were somewhere else. And my final, that does not mean that terrorism will not be with us. I'm not saying that. But it's essential not to invest terrorism with any kind of civilizational and cultural meanings. This is important for us, and we did invest terrorism after 9/11 with civilizational, cultural meanings, as opposed to being a plague of globalization. As part of, we have to deal with it, of course, prevent it and cope with it. And my conclusion really is that my final chapter is called In for a Penny, In for a Pound. I'm hoping that with a second presidency, that Barack Obama, the timid Barack Obama, will basically rise up, and he will have the power of his convictions to challenge the dysfunctional American political system, to try to create a constituency for peace, to really be the president that he could be one of the great American presidents in terms of American foreign policy. The jury is still out there, and the record is mixed, and I leave it as it is. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let me open the floor to your question. Here, please, in the front. Yeah. John Katz. Just wait for the mic. Yes.
Hi, Mark Katz. Thank you for a great presentation. I think it's very interesting. You've argued that Obama his great contribution has been to take American troops out of Muslims' lands in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, of course, we've seen little sort of sidesteps into Libya, strange things going on with Yemen. We can send our missiles, not our men. And, of course, Iran is, still a question mark. My question for you is with regard to Syria, and that is that what we've seen is that the Obama administration really has done very little with regard to the Arab Spring uprising in Syria. And I'm just wondering, do you think, are there, just as there were costs of getting over-involved in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, is there a cost to the U.S. of not getting sufficiently involved in Syria? Or what could we do in Syria? And in that we're not doing much of anything, is that in fact, good for America's influence, bad for America's influence, bad for the Middle East? What's your assessment of that, please?
One by one?
Yeah, one.
Mark, really, I know a bit about Syria. I've been to Syria a few times in the last year or so. And it's a very, very complex situation. I mean, I've been to it, I didn't travel on my American passport. I crossed on my local ID from North Lebanon. So it's a complex situation because many of our premises have been based on insufficient information. I mean, and also many of our premises have proved to be mostly wishful thinking, I think. The first premise is that Assad does not really have any social base of support inside Syria. I think some of us who know a bit, unfortunately, is that his base ranges between 30 and 50%, really minimal 50%, probably 50%, probably more. We have thought that his security apparatus would collapse overnight, and in fact, in the first 5 weeks of the Libyan uprising, almost 50% of the diplomatic corps and the security apparatus basically collapsed. Not even a single senior diplomat has defected. Very, very few, I want you to know, very few senior security apparatus has proved to be much more resilient and cohesive than we had thought. When I talk to Syrians, the bloody Christians are much more fanatical pro-Assad than the Alawites. Many Kurds and many Druze are as fanatical. They're terrified of the whole idea of the Salafi, Iraq and Lebanon. Really, they're terrifying models, the whole idea, look what has happened in Iraq. And they're willing to really fight for the regime. It's not just because their future, they think their future is online. So this is, you have a relatively cohesive security apparatus. You have a social base of 30% minimum. You have basically a very divided opposition, very splintered opposition. I mean, when I hear this, the Free Syrian Army, it's just one among dozens of opposition forces. The Security Council has been neutralized. I mean, I think one of the lessons that Barack Obama is that you don't go without legitimacy international. The whole idea of realism is that you have to get the Security Council. You can't just go and shoot your way because, and also the whole idea that if you intervene militarily in Syria, the country will most likely descend into all-out sectarian conflict. Most likely. It's already, Syria is at war. The question is not whether Syria, the question is will Syria descend and escalate into all-out war? That's the question. And what will be the implications to Lebanon and Jordan and other places? I think the Obama administration is absolutely correct to tread very carefully and try to use, I mean, remember, you say we're doing a great deal. We're waging war by other means. Literally, I mean, it's a war by other means. I mean, economic war, financial war, psychological war. The whole idea of psychological, because it was based on the premise that it will crack open after a while. It has not, because it's, I mean, the security apparatus, I mean, this is a regime that has been, I mean, for the last 40 years, preparing for the worst case scenario. I really don't know what can be, I truly don't. One thing I know, the Assad regime will not be with us, I mean, in the medium term. The question is, how long will it take? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? I mean, my take on it is that really 0 hours to 5, 6, 7 years. Because I think the Syrian crisis, as you know, has been caught in a fierce regional Cold War now. Few of you know, how many of you know that Iraq now is much more vital to Syria than Iran? You don't hear about it, do you? Nour al-Maliki now is basically the Gulf states have alienated Nour al-Maliki. Nour al-Maliki believes that Turkey and Saudi Arabia are the ultimate enemies. But Tehran, Baghdad, Damascus is the lifeline of the Assad regime. Just go and visit and see the trucks non-stop. Go to Lebanese border and see how support is coming to Assad. So you have a regional Cold War between the Iranians and the Iraqis and the Syrians on the one hand and the Saudis and the Gulf states and Turkey. And you have also the Russian-American bickering over Syria. The Russians said, well, you'll never take, we'll never give you what we did in Libya. Libya is, and this is why the whole idea when we say international legality, I think what the United States, what NATO did in Libya. The Russians believe that the NATO violated the mandate, that NATO went much beyond, and that's why the Russians are obsessed that you won't have a Security Council. Go do it on your own if you dare. That's what we have. Simply, I don't really know what can be done at this particular stage. And in particular, I don't know what can the United States do.
Evelyn Early, thank you very much, Fawaz, for a very cogent presentation. I'd like to go back to your comment about the importance of the issues of bread and butter and dignity. This is not the time for another Arab awakening. This is not the time for another Gamal Abdel Nasser. But the secularists in the Arab uprising seem to have a little bit of trouble developing a very vibrant identity. Some of my friends have called it the global identity, maybe rooted in cosmopolitanism, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you see this part of the Arab uprising going identity-wise, and what is the importance of cosmopolitanism and globalism in the future of the Arab uprising?
Let's take another question. Yes.
Christopher Reuters. I just wanted to play off the first question about Syria and move next door to Lebanon and ask what you see the Obama administration has any influence or leverage in Lebanon to push back against the, let's say, Hezbollah, Iran domination, having swapped out Syrian domination for Iranian domination. And just a quick anecdote, I mean, I was there before the elections in 2009, and Vice President Biden visited, and I remember being in a taxi and hearing the Hezbollah spokesman warning the U.S. to stay out of Lebanese affairs, and probably the elections in 2009 were disappointing for the March 14th movement, basically the same amount of votes as they got 4 years before. So where do you see Lebanon going in sort of the spillover effects from Syria and other Arab and Iran issues?
Thank you. And
How much time do we have?
7 minutes.
7 minutes.
So short answers. We'll get
yeah,
to
of
you.
course. I'm really
Another round.
very worried about Lebanon. I mean, I think many of you, I don't know if you know, that Lebanon really is in the eye of the storm. That Lebanon is as divided as Syria. Again, 50-50%. Again, I don't need to tell you there are skirmishes and infighting in Lebanon. It's been going on for the last 1 year in Tripoli and Akkar, and now the skirmishes have reached Beirut. Major divisions. It's not just between the pro and the anti-Assad, but also sectarian divisions. It's taken all, and the greatest really, I mean, what the Iraq war did, truly, it heightened and put fuel on this sectarian. It's of course, it's political. It's not, this is not cultural. I mean, Muslims are Muslims, regardless as Sunnis or Christians. But in Lebanon, it's also taking on sectarian connotations. And my fear is that if Syria descends into all-out war, Lebanon will likely break. So far, I am pleasantly surprised that Hezbollah has played. Of course, they have verbally supported Assad, and I think they have undermined. Their standing, not just in Lebanon, throughout the Arab world, because here you have Nasrallah more than once. Supporting Assad. Now he's changing his tune in the last few weeks, as you know. Now he's saying we call on both sides to talk, because he realizes that this is real, that it's not all armed groups, Salafi jihadi groups, that really there is an uprising, there is a political awakening in Syria. But again, Lebanon really is in the eye of the storm, and I worry a great deal. I really do. It takes a spark. It's unbelievable how the situation explodes. I mean, you go in the morning, in the evening, you can travel to Tripoli or Beirut just overnight. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of weapons, and you're talking about it's bad. And I don't think this is a question for the United States. I think it's a question of the whole idea of what will happen in Syria and whether the political leadership in Lebanon will have the vision and the wisdom, which has never had in the past, to really try to overcome the deepening sectarianism in the country. I'm not worried about Islamists. I really am not. I think, in fact, I am seeing the Islamists, and I come back to the question of cosmopolitanism and identity. In fact, Islamists are being transformed before our eyes. Islamists, their engagement in politics basically is transforming Islam. As you well know, most of them are centrists and Islamic Democrats. They subscribe to the rules of the political game, the institutionalization of the political process. They accept the whole idea of pluralism, the whole idea of citizenship, as opposed to the sovereignty of God, which used to be Hakamiyat Allah. Today, the whole idea is that the will of the people is the foundation of legitimacy. Most of them, with the exception really very few, call for Islamic states. They call for civil state, and really what secular state, because the term secularism has terrible connotations in the Arab world. So they call for civil, ad-dawla al-madaniyya, as opposed to ad-dawla. But what it really means is that, and once they institutionalize the political process, once this paradigm is that all the wars and battles will take place within this framework. The question is not whether, I think it's the wrong question to say that whether Islamists are liberal or democratic. They are neither. Question to me is whether Islamists are willing to institutionalize the political process and willing to play by the rules of the game. Because, the institutionalization comes before liberalism and democracy. Even the American founding fathers were not liberal. But once they institutionalize the political process, then, liberalism and democracy and everything else. And the reason why I'm hopeful, because also they're becoming more constituency driven as opposed to ideological driven. And this is a major, major shift, whether you're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood or Al-Nahda in Tunisia or Adl al-Ihsan in Morocco and whatever. So the Islamists themselves now are being transformed. And they realize that the voters that basically did not really vote Islamists in because they want Islamic Emirats. Voters basically wanted a clean break with the past, the failed authoritarian past. They trusted the Islamists. I mean, to put it in American terms, Islamists have mastered the art of local politics. And that's why they've done as well as they have. And they will be voted out in the same way they're voted in if they don't deliver the goods. Let me come to the whole idea of secularists. And
unless they are like Algeria and FIS.
they really, you see, it also depends on how they come to power. They were voted in. They are now, see what the Muslim Brotherhood doing now. I mean, they're going house to house trying to call on Egyptians to vote to Mohammed Morsi, the presidential candidate. They realized their constituency 18%, yet they had almost 42%. The liberal, and it's a sad story, truly. What's sad, if you go to Egypt and Tunisia and other places, you talk to liberal-minded. They're sad and because they basically spark and trigger the revolt. Yet the Islamists are bearing the fruits. And the reality is, because if you go and talk to liberal-oriented and minded and secularists, they're seen as elitist. Divorced from the aspirations and fears of the people, sitting in their air-conditioned offices in Cairo and Tunis and Algiers, never venture to the countryside, never have any blueprints, and this is a reality. They spend most of their time on Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya and everyone else talking about the fact that they are better, that don't vote for the Islamist state. In Tunisia and Egypt, the liberal-minded activists, basically their campaign was anti-Islamist as opposed to really having concrete blueprints. I hope out of this particular route, they'll stop whining and buckle up and really to develop a base, to really connect, because my take on it is that Islamists will have to deliver the goods in the same way that Indonesians voted for Islamists in 1999. They did not really vote for Islamists in the second round. And that's why this is the beginning. We should not take the elections that have taken place in the Arab world as really a yardstick, a measurement of how the Arabs will vote. They won't vote for the Islamists in the second round if they don't deliver the goods. And my take on it, and I said it really, I say it with a heavy heart, I doubt it very much if the Islamists can or could deliver the goods, because of the enormity of the challenges. Again, what can I tell you? In Egypt is bankrupt, literally bankrupt. There are no institutions. This is a society, it is, and also because of the paucity of ideas, that Islamists have not had the time, have not theorized, have not really conceptualized any particular programs about economic. I just had a piece called The New Capitalists, the Political Economy of Islamists. If you ask them, they basically believe in free market economics. That's the extent of it. But beyond that, there's nothing there. So the identity, the liberal-minded and secularists must really listen to the aspirations and the fears and the hopes of the people, and then they can develop their own set of ideas.
If you take the example of Iran, the constitution was drafted after the referendum that brought the Islamists to power so that they won't be voted out of power. What sort of guarantee do we have that this will not happen? I'm not talking about Tunisia. Tunisia is but about...
The Arab world is not Iran. In fact, Iran is the wrong example to measure the pulse of public opinion and politics. And I'll say a few words why. Thank you for the question. Very, very important point. Truly. In fact, Iran is seen as a failed model by Islamists. Iran is the failed Vilayat al-Faqih is one of the reasons why most Islamists have given up on the whole idea of a Dawla Islamiyya, or even because they realize what has happened in Iran. They realize, really, if you really want an example, an inspiration, Turkey is the example. Throughout the region, in Jordan, in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Egypt, Turkey is seen as an example because Turkey is a state that is seen as, in terms of authenticity, identity, is a Muslim state, it's a democracy, and it's a successful economy. And that's why, most of the Islamists In fact, look at Iran. This is something, I mean, they're terrified of the Iranian model, literally terrified. There is no Ayatollah Khomeini in the Arab world, luckily for the Arab world. There is no mullah, there is no cleric, basically, that's a reality. You have political forces now really, I mean, debating and fighting in order for dominance and influence. And the Islamists know very well that basically the voters voted them in, not because they promised to deliver heaven. They promised jobs, growth, and bread and butter. And also the most important point is that checks and balances. Checks and balances. The Islamists in Egypt know very well, if they miscalculate, they realize, I mean, the whole history about the relationship between the military and the Muslim Brotherhood, what happened between 1954 and 1952 and 54. I mean, there's no time, I've written a book on it, on the clash, the confrontation between Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Arab nationalist, and the Islamist. So checks and balances, voters and constituency, and the Islamists have moved on. They really look at Turkey as a model, as an inspiration, where you really marry authenticity with economic and liberal pluralistic ideas as opposed to liberal.
Please join me in thanking our speaker. We have run out of time.